Yeah, and rational in the sense that economists mean rational, which is to say you need the information. There's no point saying, I'm going to vote tactically unless you're aware of where the parties stand relative to each other at this current time, because quite a lot of people who vote tactically in our elections get it wrong, which actually doesn't achieve what they're trying to achieve.
Well,
you
couldn't argue that it's not clear in this election, could you? I mean, we have pretty firmly seen the stalls set out here and the agendas made clear. It's only the Liberal Party that's clearly stating it believes in Remain, as I understand it. The Tories have said will be out as soon as possible if they get the majority, and Labour has vacillated but is talking a second referendum.
Well, there are two camps in this election. There's a Leave camp and there's a Remain camp. But particularly on the Remain side, I think, the issue is more a question of what the situation on the ground is in individual constituencies. That is to say, you might want to vote for a party that is going to give you a referendum, but then you need to know whether you should cast your vote for Plaid or the SNP or Labour or the Lib Dems, because you need to get that right if you want to defeat the Conservative candidate in that seat. So that's what I mean by rational, is that in your seat you need to be aware of where your vote needs to go. Now, there are a number of websites out there that point people in that direction, but actually what the data suggests is that very, very few voters actually bother looking at those things.
I think it's almost necessary if you get a tactical vote. I'm just reading a report and I can't make head or tail over it, that the person who you put down third or your third preference could be the one that carries the votes, which is incredibly confusing for most voters out there when they've already been confused over Brexit. When it comes to voting at the election, and we've heard so much noise around Brexit, and this election came up because we were at a Brexit impasse, do you think Brexit is actually going to be on the ticket when people go to the vote, and will they be casting their vote on that?
Well, it's very hard to say. I mean, I assumed, and like many people, I think, that 2017 would end up being an election about Brexit. But if you look at the data afterwards, actually, social class was the biggest driver of how people voted, which is how it is in this country. I think, you know, if the Conservatives are successful in breaking down that so-called red wall of Labour seats, so traditional Labour strongholds go Conservative, then yes, we'll be able to say...
How do they do that? Tactically, how do they do that?
Well, by talking about Brexit, because the calculation is in a lot of those seats there are a lot of Labour Leave voters who might not vote for the Labour Party because they feel betrayed by Labour over the Brexit question. So the Tories want this election to be about Brexit. Labour want this election to be about anything other than Brexit, which is why Jeremy Corbyn's going around the country talking about free school meals, talking about investment in the NHS, but not really talking about Brexit at all.
To what extent do you think the recent terror attack will play into the election? I know there's been some talk about Barrow going Tory after decades of being staunch Labour because of worries about the defence industry spending and employment in the Barrow area because of Corbyn's position previously on the military. Will the recent terrorist attack and this issue bear on the outcome, do you think, in some of these key constituencies?
It might. I think there are two separate points here. Barrow is about the nuclear subs, and of course Corbyn wants to get, or had said previously he wants to get rid of nuclear weapons, so there are concerns about that in places like Barrow, which I think points to the fact that in a sense we have 650 local elections happening next week rather than one big national one. But on the terrorist attack itself, what we saw in 2017 when we had the attack at the Manchester Arena was it did play into the election because Labour happened to have been talking about the impact of police cuts before that attack happened, and this played into their narrative and helped them. This time the impact seems to be far, far less than it was that time, as far as we can tell as yet.